The clink of Richard's spoon against his coffee mug was the only sound in the kitchen. Morning light poured in through the window, soft and indifferent, touching everything except the space between us. After 40 years together, silence had become its own language, sharp, heavy, familiar. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap, waiting for whatever he had been working up the nerve to say. When it came, it was almost casual. "If I'm honest," he said, eyes fixed on the steam rising from his cup, "I regret marrying you." No anger, no hesitation, just a statement of fact. I didn't speak. I didn't ask why or how long he had felt that way. I just sat there, every sound in the world dimming until it was only his voice echoing in my head. "I regret marrying you." Something inside me, a small, stubborn light that had kept burning through years of quiet disappointments, flickered once, then went out. I stood slowly, steadying myself against the edge of the table. My voice wouldn't have worked even if I'd tried to use it. Upstairs, everything looked the same. Our bed neatly made, his cufflinks in the tray by the mirror, my robe hanging behind the door. But it all felt borrowed, like I was walking through a museum of someone else's life. 40 years of habit, of compromise, of telling myself that love was steady even when it was silent. I opened the closet and took out the suitcase I hadn't touched in years. It had dust on the zipper. Every movement felt deliberate. Fold, breathe, fold again. I wasn't running away. I was simply stopping where I stood. I packed with care, not because I planned to come back, but because I still respected what we once were. When I reached for my diary, my one private truth, I hesitated. That little book held everything I'd never said aloud. Every humiliation disguised as patience. Every apology I'd given to keep the peace. Every time I'd swallowed my hurt and called it love. For a moment, I thought about taking it with me. Then I changed my mind. I placed it gently in the nightstand drawer. Maybe it belonged here, in this house of unfinished conversations and half-lived years. When I came downstairs, Richard was still sitting at the table, staring into his coffee. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't try to stop me. His stillness said everything. This was easier for him than admitting what had been gone for years. I picked up my keys and walked out the door without a sound. The air outside was crisp, the sun sharp and unfeeling. I thought the world might look different now that mine had cracked open, but it didn't. Cars passed. A dog barked. Somewhere someone laughed. The world doesn't stop for heartbreak. It just keeps moving. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. I just left with everything I needed, and none of what I didn't. The truth is, I had been preparing for this without knowing it. The way I'd started sleeping closer to my side of the bed. The way I'd stopped setting 2 mugs out for coffee. The way I'd learned to fill the silences with small sounds, music, the whir of the dishwasher. Anything but the reminder that he and I had stopped speaking in ways that mattered. When I first met Richard, he wasn't cruel or careless. He was the kind of man who made me feel safe. Steady, reliable, always in control. I was 22 then, full of bright ideas and faith in forever. He was 25, already running his father's hardware business, already the kind of man who never forgot a bill or a birthday. I thought that steadiness was love. Maybe it was, at first. We married in the spring. He built our dining table by hand. I wore my sister's dress. We didn't have much, but we had enough. I left my job when our daughter Grace was born, and again when our son Daniel arrived. I told myself it wasn't a sacrifice. It was love. That was what women did. Richard worked long hours. I ran the house. We became a quiet machine that kept life moving, raising kids, paying bills, staying busy. For years, that was enough. I made Sunday pancakes, matched socks, remembered every birthday, packed every lunch. He filled my gas tank before storms and changed the light bulbs I couldn't reach. He was dependable, and I mistook that for devotion. But dependability isn't intimacy. Somewhere along the way, the small gestures stopped meaning what they used to. We stopped touching in the hallways, stopped laughing at nothing, stopped seeing each other. We just existed side by side, like bookends holding up a story that had already ended. When the kids left home, I thought we'd finally rediscover each other. Maybe travel, take up gardening, learn to be a couple again. Instead, the silence deepened. Richard filled it with news channels and spreadsheets. I filled it with chores, recipes, and hope. I told myself every marriage went through this, that love changed shape with time. I just didn't realize it could hollow out completely and still look the same on the outside. So when he finally said the words, "I regret marrying you," it wasn't a shock. It was confirmation. The ending had already happened. He'd just given it a name. That night, I drove with no real destination in mind. The roads blurred, the radio hummed, and I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Love, respect, partnership. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would come later. For now, I just felt empty, like a woman who had mistaken endurance for devotion and finally realized the difference. By the time I stopped for gas on the edge of town, the sun was setting. I caught my reflection in the window, tired eyes, a faint smudge of mascara, a woman I barely recognized. I didn't look broken, just done, and maybe that was the beginning. It didn't happen overnight. Losing a marriage, I mean. It happens in tiny, almost invisible ways. The slow fading of warmth, the quiet unlearning of how to reach for one another. I used to think breaking up meant shouting, tears, slammed doors. But that's not how it was with Richard. Ours was quieter, more like dust settling after years of pretending not to notice the cracks. I can trace it back to small things, moments that didn't seem like much at the time but now feel like signs I ignored. It was our 25th wedding anniversary. Grace and Daniel had flown in, and my best friend Nora helped me plan a little dinner party. I wore a blue dress Richard once said made my eyes look brighter. I curled my hair, lit candles, used the wedding china. He came home late, loosened his tie, muttered something about traffic, and kissed me on the cheek without really looking. During dinner, he was his usual charming self, talking about work, his golf buddies, the economy. People laughed. I smiled. But through it all, he never mentioned me. Not once. Not our marriage, not our years together, not the home I'd built around his long hours and tired silences. When Nora raised her glass and toasted to us, 25 years, still going strong. Everyone cheered. Richard stood, gave a small shrug, and said, "Well, that's a long time to tolerate anyone." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you do when your husband turns your life into a punchline. That night, after the guests left, I washed dishes while he watched TV. I wanted to ask him what he meant by that joke, but I already knew the answer. It wasn't a joke. It was a truth he didn't even care to hide anymore. After that, the small cuts multiplied. He started interrupting me mid-sentence, finishing my thoughts with half-listened guesses. He stopped asking about my day. When I tried to share something that excited me, a book, a new recipe, a story from Nora, he'd smile politely and say, "You always get too emotional about these things." At a neighborhood barbecue, someone asked what I did with my time now that the kids were gone. Before I could answer, Richard laughed and said, "She's basically a professional worrier. Can't sit still for a second," the men chuckled. I smiled and pretended it didn't sting. But inside, something shifted. The first quiet snap of dignity breaking. He never hit me. He never yelled. That might have been easier, honestly. Instead, he withdrew 1 inch at a time until I was left standing alone in the space where our marriage used to live. He stopped making me coffee in the mornings. Stopped saying goodnight. Stopped waiting for me at the table before dinner. At first, I kept up the routines, believing they'd pull him back. His favorite meals, folded shirts, birthday surprises. I thought love could be rekindled through patience. But patience became silence, and silence became survival. I still remember the first morning he poured only 1 cup of coffee. He didn't even notice. Just stirred his mug, scrolled through his phone, and left for work. I stood by the counter, staring at the empty second cup I'd set out without thinking. That was when I started writing in my diary again. At first, it was just small observations. He forgot my birthday. He stayed late again. He said I'm too sensitive. Then it became something else. A record of absence. A log of slow vanishing. I wrote because speaking didn't work anymore. I wrote to remind myself that I was still here, still real, still capable of feeling something other than disappointment. Grace noticed little. When she called, she mostly talked about her own kids and how busy she was. Daniel checked in now and then, Short texts, a photo of his dog, always ending with, "Love you, Mom." I clung to those messages like lifelines. But I never told them what was happening. I didn't want to seem weak. Or worse, dramatic. Richard liked to say we were comfortable. I suppose that's one word for it. Comfortable, like an old shoe that's molded around every blister until you don't even feel the pain anymore. I kept thinking it was a phase, that after so many years, people just grew quiet. That maybe love matured into routine, into silence. But the truth is, silence isn't peace. It's decay disguised as calm. One Sunday morning, I made pancakes like always. He came down hours later, already dressed for golf, phone pressed to his ear. I told him breakfast was ready. He said, "Don't wait for me." I didn't. I sat at the table alone and ate my own cooking for the first time in years. The house was so quiet that I could hear the clock ticking. I wondered how many years I had spent mistaking duty for affection. By then, I had stopped crying about it. You can't cry over something that slowly disappears. Your body learns to absorb it like air. Instead, I found other ways to cope. I joined a book club, volunteered at the library, planted herbs in the garden. I filled my days with small projects, little anchors to remind myself that life was still happening. But every night, when I turned off the lights and slipped into bed beside him, I felt it. The emptiness. The unbridgeable distance between two people lying inches apart. Once, I whispered, "Good night." He didn't answer. He was awake. I knew it. The next night, I stayed silent too. And so, the silence became a wall we both learned to live behind. The loneliest part wasn't being ignored. It was realizing how easy it was for him, how seamless the erasure had become. I began to shrink myself without realizing it, speaking softer, asking less, occupying less space. I told myself that made me understanding, but it didn't. It just made me invisible. One afternoon, I was standing in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting my blouse before meeting Nora for coffee. I caught my own reflection and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she was older, though she was, but because she looked so practiced at disappearing. That was the day I wrote in my diary, "He doesn't have to leave me to make me feel alone. He just has to stay the way he is." Looking back now, that's when the marriage truly ended. Not the morning he said he regretted marrying me. That was just the echo. The real ending came years earlier, in the quiet moments when I started to disappear and he didn't even notice. It was a bright spring morning, the kind that should have felt hopeful. The kind that used to. I had spent all week preparing for a family brunch. Grace was driving in with her husband and kids. Daniel was flying home for the weekend. It had been months since we were all under one roof, and I wanted it to feel special. Not just for them, for me. I wanted to remind myself that the life I'd built still meant something. I woke early, made blueberry muffins from scratch, laid out fresh flowers on the table, pressed linen napkins, set the good china. Every detail mattered. I told myself this brunch could feel like before the silences, before the distance. Richard came downstairs late, already dressed in his golf shirt. He didn't look up from his phone when I said good morning. "I made your favorite quiche," I said, trying to sound cheerful. He poured himself orange juice. "Didn't we have that last year?" The words landed like small stones. "It's Grace's favorite," I said softly. He shrugged. "If you say so." The doorbell rang before I could answer. Grace came in first, all hurried energy and half hugs, kids darting around her. Daniel followed, smiling wide, wrapping me in a proper hug that almost undid me. He still smelled faintly of the same aftershave he'd used since college. For a moment, I let myself believe everything was okay. We sat down to eat. The table was full, of voices, of movement, of everything that had been missing. I tried to absorb it all, the laughter, the clinking silverware, the sound of Grace's children bickering over syrup. For a few minutes, I felt part of something again. Then Grace bit into one of my muffins and frowned. "Mom, these are kind of dry. Did you change the recipe?" Her tone wasn't cruel, just careless. But it hit something raw inside me. "No," I said quietly. "Same recipe as always." Grace wrinkled her nose. "Weird. Maybe it's the oven." Before I could reply, Richard chuckled. "She's always had a talent for making things complicated." Everyone laughed, even Grace. I kept my smile steady, my fingers tight around my napkin. Then Richard went on, the way he always did. Remember that time she made Daniel's birthday cake and forgot the sugar? Daniel laughed softly. I was 6, Dad. Still, Richard grinned, I thought she was trying to poison me. At least it looked good. Your mom's always been better at effort than execution. The table burst into laughter again. I sat there, smiling like I was part of the joke, even though I could feel the heat rising in my face, my pulse in my ears. The sound of their laughter blurred. I stared at the pattern on my plate until it stopped shaking. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease of it, the way they all laughed like it was normal to mock the woman who'd built the world around them. Daniel caught my eye. He must have seen something in my face because he leaned forward and said gently, "The quiche is really good, Mom." But it was too late. The damage had been done. I excused myself after dessert, claiming I needed to check the coffee pot. No one stopped me. They just kept talking, their voices fading behind me as I stepped into the kitchen. I stood by the sink, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, staring out the window at the garden I'd planted 20 years ago. The flowers were blooming, yellow and white, oblivious. Their laughter drifted through the doorway, muffled but clear. I'd spent my whole life trying to make them happy. Every birthday cake, every late-night laundry load, every quiet apology. And here I was, a punchline in my own home. Something shifted in me then. Not a break, more like a door closing softly. I realized they didn't see me anymore, not as a woman, not as a person. Just a function, someone who would always be there to cook, clean, smile, absorb. I took a long breath, turned off the tap, and dried my hands. The water still ran for a few seconds before fading away, like it didn't want to stop either. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone at the same table where they'd laughed. The plates were cleared, the candles burned low. Richard passed behind me on his way upstairs and patted my shoulder. "You did good today," he said. "They had a nice time," I nodded. "They did." He smiled faintly and went to bed without another word. I sat there for a long time in the quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock. Then I opened my diary, the same one I'd tucked away so many times before, and wrote one sentence. I think I'm done being the joke in my own story. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when a decision has already been made somewhere deep inside you. It wasn't the brunch that broke me. It was what it revealed, that I could disappear right in front of them, and no one would notice. 3 weeks later, I began to pack. I didn't tell Richard at first. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in silence. I folded clothes the way I always had, only this time with purpose. My suitcase filled slowly. Favorite sweaters, a few books, a framed photo of the kids when they were small. When I finally told him, he didn't even look up from the newspaper. "I'm leaving," I said. He blinked once. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to stay with Nora for a while." "For what?" I met his eyes. "To remember who I am. Because this, whatever this is, it isn't living." He gave a small, disbelieving laugh. "So now you're the victim?" "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." He said nothing else. And that silence, the same silence that had filled our home for years, told me everything I needed to know. Nora's house was warm in the way mine hadn't been for years, not because of temperature, but because someone still cared about the air there. She didn't ask questions when I arrived. She just took my suitcase, hugged me tight, and said, "You can stay as long as you need." Her guest room was small, a twin bed, a lamp, a window that caught the late afternoon light. It smelled faintly of lemon detergent and lavender. It was simple, temporary. But for the first time in a long time, it was mine. That first night, I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the suitcase I hadn't unpacked yet. The house was quiet, but it wasn't an empty quiet. It was the kind that made room for breathing. For grief, I didn't cry that night. I just felt hollow, like someone had taken my life and scooped the middle out. I wasn't angry at Richard. I wasn't even sad in a clean, nameable way. I just didn't know what to do with myself now that no one needed me. I had spent decades moving on autopilot, meals, chores, holidays, always preparing for someone else's comfort. And suddenly, there was nothing left to organize. No dinners to plan. No voice calling my name from another room. Just space. At first, I tried to fill it. I cleaned Nora's kitchen counters, folded laundry that didn't need folding, rearranged her bookshelf twice. She caught me once and laughed softly. "You don't have to earn your keep here," she said. But it wasn't about that. It was about control, about finding order in the middle of everything that had come undone. The mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up expecting to hear Richard. Downstairs, the coffee machine, the news on the radio, and then remember I wasn't there anymore. I'd lie in bed listening to the birds outside and wonder how a sound so gentle could hurt so much. 4 days in, I finally broke. It was late, past midnight. Nora had gone to bed. I found myself standing in her kitchen, staring at the window over the sink. The moonlight made everything look unfamiliar. My hands were trembling, and I didn't know why. I opened the fridge, closed it again. My chest felt tight. Not like panic, but like sorrow had found a home there. I slid down onto the floor, my back against the cabinet, and pressed my palms over my face. I didn't sob. It wasn't that kind of crying. It was quieter, tears that slipped out because there was nowhere else for them to go. I thought of all the years I'd given so willingly, every small kindness, every quiet sacrifice, and how easily they'd been forgotten. Not maliciously, just carelessly, like I'd been background music to someone else's life. I thought about the way Richard had said, "I regret marrying you," like he was returning an item past warranty. I thought about Grace's laughter at the table, the way Daniel had looked away out of pity, not malice. And I thought, for the first time, about myself. Not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a person who had been quietly starving for acknowledgement. When the tears stopped, I felt empty, but lighter somehow. Like the worst had already happened, and I had survived it. I made myself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and went back to bed. I didn't sleep much, but when I did, it was the kind of restless dreaming that feels like shedding skin. The next morning, I opened my suitcase and unpacked properly. Hung up my clothes, arranged my books on the small dresser, placed the framed photo of my kids beside the bed. I even set my journal on the nightstand. Not the old one, a new one I'd bought years ago, but never dared to start. That day, I wrote, "I don't know who I am when I'm not being useful, but I'm still here. Maybe that's a start." For days, I drifted between numbness and small flickers of clarity. Nora checked on me without hovering. She made tea, asked if I wanted to go for walks. Sometimes I joined her. Sometimes I just sat by the window and watched the world move on without me. One rainy afternoon, I found an old page from my previous diary tucked inside my handbag, torn and folded, dated October 1993. The ink had faded, but I could still read it. "I think Richard still loves me, but I miss being looked at. Not just seen, but seen." I told him I was tired, and he said I worry too much. Maybe I do, but I just want to feel held, not managed. I stared at that line for a long time. 30 years had passed, and nothing had changed. I had been waiting for the same kind of love my younger self had already realized was slipping away. That night, I opened my new journal again and wrote, "I spent decades waiting for someone to notice I was disappearing. I think it's time I start noticing myself." It wasn't hope yet. Hope felt too bright, too far away. But it was awareness, and awareness, I've learned, is where healing starts. In the weeks that followed, I began to move differently, slowly, carefully. I went with Nora to the grocery store, just to get out. The first time I walked alone down the baking aisle, I felt a strange pang of freedom. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't planning dinner for anyone else. I was just existing. When the cashier smiled and complimented my scarf, I smiled back. a real one. It startled me, how foreign that felt. At night, when the house went quiet, I sometimes found myself afraid, not of being alone, but of realizing how much of my life had been spent avoiding it. There's a strange kind of grief in discovering how little space you've taken up in your own story. But with each day, the silence began to soften. It stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like possibility. I wasn't healed. I wasn't brave. I was just awake, for the first time in a very long time. Healing didn't happen all at once. It came in small, almost forgettable moments. The first morning I woke up without feeling dread. The first time I hummed while making tea. The first time I looked at my reflection and didn't flinch. The change was so gradual, I almost missed it. One morning, I woke before sunrise. Nora had gone to her early yoga class, and the house was still. I made myself tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching the sky shift from indigo to soft gold. Something in me loosened. I realized I was breathing deeper, not waiting for something to hurt. That same day, I decided to walk to the corner store alone. I didn't need anything urgent. I just wanted to move. The air was cool, the sidewalks damp from last night's rain. I passed a group of kids waiting for the bus, a woman watering her plants, a man jogging with his dog. Ordinary things. But to me, it felt extraordinary. The simple act of moving through the world without anyone expecting me to be somewhere else. At the store, I bought strawberries, a new pen, and a small notebook. Another one. The cashier, a young girl with chipped blue nail polish, smiled and said, "Pretty scarf." "Thank you," I said. It had been so long since anyone had noticed anything about me that I almost teared up right there. When I got home, I opened the notebook and wrote 3 sentences. I'm still here. I'm learning how to live without waiting for permission. I think I'm starting to like the quiet. Nora noticed the difference before I did. "You're sitting differently," she said one evening over dinner. I laughed. "Sitting?" She nodded. "Your shoulders aren't hunched anymore. You're taking up space again." It was such a small thing to notice, but it felt enormous. A week later, she convinced me to join a watercolor class at the community center. I resisted at first. I'd never been artistic, but something about the idea of creating without purpose intrigued me. The first class, my hands shook as I dipped the brush into blue paint. The color spread unevenly across the page, imperfect and alive. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was failing at something. I felt like I was beginning. I went back every week after that. My paintings weren't good, but they were mine. And that mattered more than I could explain. When I wasn't painting, I took long walks by myself. Sometimes I'd sit in the park with a book I never opened, just watching the world move. I started cooking again, not because anyone expected it, but because I loved the smell of garlic and rosemary filling the kitchen. I'd bake small loaves of bread and give them to Nora's neighbors. They started calling me the bread lady, and for once, it didn't bother me to be known for something kind. Richard called about a month after I left. His voice was flat, polite. "Have you scheduled a time to get your things?" he asked. "I already took what I needed," I said. A pause. "So you're really not coming back?" "I'm not," I said. He sighed. "After all these years, you're just walking away?" "No," I said quietly. "I walked away a long time ago. You just didn't notice." He didn't call again for a while. But a few weeks later, he sent a text. "Where are the tax files?" "In the cabinet under the printer," I replied. He didn't thank me. He never did. It wasn't bitterness I felt, just a strange sadness for the man who still didn't understand what he'd lost. But the world has its own way of balancing things. One day, Daniel called. His voice was careful, like he wasn't sure if I'd pick up. "Mom," he said, "Dad showed me something." "Your journal." "Parts of it." I froze. "He shared that with you?" "Yeah," he said softly. "At first I was angry you left like that, but after reading it, I get it now. I had no idea how bad it was. My throat tightened. I never wanted you to feel caught between us." "I know," he said. But I needed to know, and I think he did too. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail with Richard's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter. "Evelyn, I don't know how to apologize for 40 years of missed chances, but I'll try. I read every page, every line. I saw what I didn't see before. The meals I never thanked you for, the kindness I took as habit, the woman I stopped choosing. I thought comfort was love. I thought quiet meant peace. I didn't realize it was your silence holding us together. I've signed over my share of the house and savings to you. Do with it what you will. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I finally see you. Richard, I read it twice. Then again, not with anger, not with triumph, just a quiet understanding that some truths come too late to fix anything, but not too late to matter. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. The apology wasn't for me to respond to. It was for him to live with. Grace called soon after. She sounded fragile. Dad showed me your journal too, she said. I'm sorry, Mom, I didn't see it either. I thought your quiet meant you were fine. I didn't know what to say. I just hope it's not too late for us, she added. It's not too late, I said gently. But I'm learning to take care of myself first. That has to come before everything else now. A month later, I visited the lake cabin my aunt had left me years ago. I hadn't been there in decades. It was small, 1 bedroom, a porch overlooking the water, walls that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. But the moment I stepped inside, something in me exhaled. I spent the weekend cleaning, opening windows, scrubbing floors. By the time I was done, the air felt alive again. I stood on the porch that evening, watching the sunset turn the lake to gold, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not yet. But peace, the kind that comes when you stop explaining your pain to people who never listened. In the weeks that followed, I sold the house in town and moved to the cabin. With Nora's help, I built a small studio next to it, where I could paint and write. I started teaching weekend watercolor classes to women my age, most of them carrying their own quiet heartbreaks. We'd paint, talk, laugh softly. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. That was okay too. Life became quieter, simpler. I planted lavender near the porch steps, started baking again, and left my phone on silent more often than not. One evening, Grace came to visit alone. We cooked dinner together, pasta and salad, and afterward she helped me plant a new row of herbs. As the sun set, she turned to me and said, "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." I smiled. I just stopped pretending I wasn't. After she left, I sat by the lake with my journal on my lap. The moonlight shimmered on the water. I dipped my feet in, the coolness spreading through me like something cleansing. I thought of my younger self, the woman who stayed too long, who mistook endurance for love. I wanted to tell her that she didn't fail. She just believed too much in people who gave too little. I opened my journal and wrote, "I didn't leave to be alone. I left to be whole. And now I'm not waiting to be chosen. I choose myself, every day, in every breath." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a hummingbird darted past, pausing at the lavender blooms. The sound of the lake was steady, rhythmic, alive. I closed the journal, not because the story was over, but because I finally understood that I didn't need to keep writing to prove I existed. I was already here, alive, enough.